Hello, my beautiful tribe. Welcome to this week's episode of Meta Talk. Meta, unconditional love and kindness for you and for others. And this week I am covering something that is quite tender when it comes to relationships, boundaries, and the styles or types of boundaries that you can actually place in your relationships to keep them healthy and abundant and strong. And this is going to be a quick kind of talking about the different boundaries that you can place in your space, what's important to you. Ultimately, you know exactly what you need in these boundaries in your relationship. And of course, meditation is a fantastic way to ask yourself where these boundaries need to be placed, or if you need them at all. So there are 5 different types of boundaries that you can place into your space. The first one is called a physical boundary. This is when, let's say, for example, you're not comfortable with physical touch in a outside of your home. What is that called? in public. So you're not like a physical touch kind of person. You don't want to kiss or hold hands, or for your significant other to do that. That would be a physical boundary that you want to place in your relationship. Or maybe it's that you are a physical touch individual and you really enjoy it, and you have to kind of communicate that with your partner. The second style of boundary is an emotional boundary. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes so I don't forget. So an emotional boundary is when you are trying to set that emotional stance in your relationship. So for example, one of the boundaries that I have with my own partner or my husband is that when I need him just to listen and not give me advice, that's exactly what I say. I say to him, honey, I really need to vent. I just need you to listen to me and not give me any advice at this point. And that is a straight avenue for very healthy communication, because I'm setting a boundary before we even start the actual conversation. You are definitely welcome to do this in your relationships as well. Plus, the other person really appreciates it because they don't have to guess what you need in that moment, right? The third style of a boundary is a sexual boundary. This is when you literally are going to set boundaries in your sexuality between your partner and yourself. So if, for example, if you've had trauma in the past, if certain positions trigger you, you need to state that boundary to your partner right in the beginning of the relationship before it gets too uncomfortable for you, okay? The fourth state is an intellectual boundary. For example, if you and your partner have different stances in politics, maybe you want to set a boundary in your relationship where politics are not discussed in your home, or if it's religion. So this is a really beautiful boundary to place also with coworkers. So these styles of boundaries doesn't always have to be in your home or in your core relationships at home. It can be with coworkers, friends, family, etc. So just kind of keep that in mind. The last boundary is a financial boundary. This is when you can state to your partner, I want to have a separate bank account, or I need an all-inclusive bank account, or I need to manage the finances in the relationship to feel secure. Whatever those boundaries are financially, you have to tell them. Now, when it comes to boundaries, so going over all of them really quick, you have a physical boundary, an emotional boundary, a sexual boundary, intellectual boundaries, and financial boundaries. All of these boundaries, the most important part is that we have to communicate them. And we have to ask ourselves, authentically, does these boundaries align with our values and our beliefs and our desires? If the boundaries do not align authentically, That is a question that you need to ask yourself. And a great way to do that is through meditation. So asking yourself, what are my values? What are my beliefs? What are my wants and my desires in my relationships, whatever those relationships may be? It's a really important aspect of finding yourself what boundaries you need to put into place, okay? I hope this really helps when it comes to setting those boundaries. And remember that the most important part of setting those boundaries is that we want to make sure that they align with our values, our beliefs, and our desires, and that you communicate them. And a great way to communicating those boundaries is using nonviolent communication, NVC. I've talked many times about NVC. I actually have a video about NVC that you can look at on my channel, but this is all about stating the objective, so stating the boundary, letting your partner know, or whoever that might be, what it feels like when this boundary is broken, what need needs to be met through this boundary, or what need is lacking when this boundary is not being met. And then lastly, you put in the request, so that boundary request, right? So you're not pointing fingers, you're not blaming anyone for a specific situation. You're literally stating the boundary, the objective part of why you might need it. So to give you an example, boundaries on political stance. Like my boundary on political stance is that I don't discuss my political stance in my family, right? Objectively, I do not want to discuss it. It makes me feel uncomfortable when we discuss this because it's a very tender subject for me. My need for attention and appreciation is importantly, set during these boundaries. And my request is that we don't discuss that specific politics in our home. Very simple, very effective, very compassionate way of communicating when it comes to setting those boundaries. The last thing that I'm going to leave you with here is that you have to make sure that when you place these boundaries in place, there is a sort of consequence when they are broken, okay? So for example, one of the boundaries that I placed with my husband with about talking of politics, if we start in that space of talking about those, the conversation ends, right? So that's the consequence. Or if, for example, you're putting a sexual boundary in your relationship and that individual breaks that boundary, you need to cut that sexual encounter down. So this is really something that, you have to also think about when it comes to setting boundaries, is when you set these boundaries, what are the consequences when the boundaries are not being met? And you have to feel comfortable with that consequence, right? You want to make sure that it doesn't go against your values and your beliefs, because then we again stop being authentic in our choice making. So I hope this helps. Get those boundaries into place for yourself, for your, mental well-being, to have these healthy, beautiful relationships, going back to physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, intellectual boundaries, and of course, financial boundaries. Using NVC, a great way to communicate those boundaries and setting those consequences when the boundaries are not met. I hope this helps. Again, if you need to reach me, if you're wanting to spend some time seeing if I am the right meditation teacher for you, please feel free to go to my website at openlotusmeditation.com, set up that 30-minute consultation, and see if we are meant to work together, right? You're also welcome to email me as well, any questions that you might have, and I will respond as fast and as courteous as I can. Thank you so much, and don't forget to hit subscribe, and I will see you soon. Namaste.